I'm just going to record for you the lecture 5, part 1, which is dialogue in education. So, conceiving education as dialogue means seeing education as a two-way conversation between the teacher and the student rather than a one-way transfer of knowledge. So, in this approach, learning happens through open communication where everyone shares ideas, asks each other questions, and challenges each other's thinking. So, instead of the teacher just giving information and students just receiving that information, both the teachers and the students are active participants in the teaching and learning. And this kind of educational process really values listening, respect for each other, and collaborating with each other. It encourages critical thinking, being curious, and exploring different perspectives, and it can help create a learning environment where everyone grows and learns from each other. So the questions for this lecture, we're going to explore what does conceiving education's dialogue entail, and how can this influence professional practice? Okay, so the plan for the lecture is understanding the concept of education as dialogue, discussing the philosophical foundations of dialogue-based education, exploring how conceiving education's dialogue can shape and enhance professional teaching practice, and reflecting on the role of dialogue in creating a collaborative learning environment. So we will start by talking about the dimensions of pedagogical dialogue. So the meaning of dialogue, it comes from two words, dia and logos. And dia is the Greek prefix, and it has two possible interpretations. It can mean two or more people, and it can mean through. And logos means discourse, thinking, or reasoning. So when you put those two together, it means reasoning with others, reasoning with two or more people, or through discourse through people. Okay, and there's different forms of dialogue, and I'm going to talk about a few of them over the next while. So the main forms you can talk to yourself, talk to other people, talk to multiple other people, talk through text. That's both as we would use the word text, but also in written word, internal dialogism, and non-verbal dialogue or non-verbal communications. So the common purpose of dialogue to share knowledge or information or meanings, to share mutual understanding, thinking aloud, or to pacify, calm down situations. So, what is pedagogical dialogue? So dialogic teaching emphasizes the importance of dialogue and conversation as vital components of the learning process. So it's a teaching method that involves a structured and intentional conversation between the teacher and the student, or just among students themselves. And the goal is to enhance their understanding, their critical thinking, and their learning. So pedagogical dialogue goes beyond the simple kind of question and answer format, and instead it really encourages deeper exploration of ideas, and it encourages critical reflection and constructing knowledge, or the co-construction of knowledge between peers or students and teachers. So some of the key elements that characterize pedagogical dialogue are interactive learning. That's when the teacher guides the conversation, asking thoughtful questions, giving prompts, giving feedback, and really encouraging students to talk about their understanding, ask each other questions, and build on each other's ideas. The second one is the student-centered approach, and the focus of the student-centered approach in pedagogical dialogue is on the learner's experience and understanding. So instead of just transmitting the information, the teacher facilitates a discussion that allows students to engage with the material and make connections, which is obviously a type of critical thinking, and to explore the concepts meaningfully. Then there's the open-ended questions. So rather than teachers kind of asking a question and answer that is a very yes and no format, they prompt the students to think critically by using very open questions. And the students are expected to reason out their responses and try to solve problems. So it allows the students to have diverse viewpoints and to talk about them and to listen to other people's viewpoints, which is important because it helps them learn to consider what other people think and how they think, and to be able to see that there is different viewpoints and different ways of thinking and to bring them all into their own thought process. Number 4 then is collaborative exploration. So pedagogical dialogue can involve or often involves collaboration between the students, and they're encouraged to discuss and debate with their peers. So it creates a shared learning experience where the students learn from each other and they recognise different perspectives, and it helps them to clarify their own understanding. The teacher plays an active role in providing feedback and scaffolding, and that's the 5th section of this. So scaffolding is when you give students support to help them advance in their thinking or their knowledge. So it might involve asking them kind of probing questions or giving hints or really highlighting key points that helps to guide the discussion rather than giving them the answers. It helps to kind of build on the knowledge they already have and prompts them to create more knowledge. And reflective thinking is another area of pedagogical dialogue. So, and it's very much one of the key aims. So students would be encouraged in this part to examine the different assumptions and to make connections between new and existing knowledge. And again, this is part of kind of a critical thinking area, reflecting on the learning processes. And that should, when they're thinking reflectively about they know or their learning experiences, that can lead to a deeper understanding. And probably the most, or one of the most well-known forms of pedagogical dialogue is a Socratic method. And this is where the teacher engages students in dialogue by asking questions which are really designed to stimulate the critical thinking and illuminate their ideas. So this method encourages students to think logically, to identify the inconsistency and to identify the things they don't know, and to help them arrive at their conclusions. So, some philosophical viewpoints. So Nicholas Berbels was a prominent philosopher of education, and he really explored the concept of pedagogical dialogue and its significance in educational settings. So he identified 2 unproductive extremes in determining what constitutes pedagogical dialogue. So he said to consider any verbal interaction between teacher and student or among students as a dialogue would be like equating dialogue just being as communication, and narrowing the forms of dialogue to a simple form as true dialogue, which he thought were quite unproductive and incorrect. So he really emphasized dialogue was a really, really important means of teaching and learning, and the form of conversation was actually really important to creating knowledge. However, he didn't believe that just having a conversation was dialogue. He said there was very, very specific aspects that had to be part of that conversation for it to be considered effective pedagogical dialogue. So some of these are mutuality. So the teacher and student both have to be open to learning from each other. They both have to be engaged. So they're actively involved and actively invested and choosing to be part of that conversation about that subject. They're committed to the inquiry. So there's a shared commitment to exploring those ideas and trying to find an understanding and listening to each other. Even if they're disagreeing, it's not an argument. It's okay to disagree and have different viewpoints, but it's being open to listen and committing to inquiring and hearing what the other person is saying. He also believed that dialogue takes time and it can't be rushed. And it's okay for there to be pauses and time to self-reflect. Some silences are okay, that there isn't a need to constantly fill every moment with talk with someone kind of trying to argue their viewpoint. He very much emphasized that the primary purpose of pedagogical dialogue is understanding, not agreement. So therefore, it's okay to have differences and it's okay to have complex arguments that the other person may not agree with. The important thing is to understand that and to be able to accept that other people can have different viewpoints to oneself. We don't all have to feel the same. We don't all have to agree. There is no need for a total consensus of agreement. It's perfectly fine as long as you understand and you make the effort to understand the other person's point of view. It's to allow other perspectives and other interpretations to just coexist together. So he believed that dialogue should really foster a relationship that's based on trust and respect. And the questioning promotes exploration rather than testing. So rather than kind of questioning in a, I want to work out if you know what you think you know, his pedagogical dialogue is based on, I'm interested in exploring what you think. So we're not testing, it's not trying to kind of fool someone or find out if they're spoofing a little bit. It's also about recognizing and navigating power dynamics to make sure it's fair and open, that one person doesn't feel, lesser or another person feels more empowered, that it's a even open playing field, that people can speak freely and openly. So any conclusions reached? As I said previously, it's absolutely fine to have different viewpoints, but the aim of Börbel's pedagogical dialogue is that people speak to each other and make the effort to understand, even if you don't agree. So David Bohm wrote a book called On Dialogue, and he discussed in it about how dialogue can transform thinking, how it can foster understanding, and it can be useful to create more cooperativity between groups. So he viewed dialogue as a process of what's called collective inquiry. And in this, participants engaged in open and honest communication, and that helped them to explore complex issues without preconceptions or being defensive. So it's unlike the debate or discussion where participants are trying to persuade or to win. Bohm believed dialogue is about shared understanding. He also said dialogue should be collaborative, and it's really important to try and see the bigger picture, with the emphasis being on exploring the different perspectives as opposed to finding a definite conclusion, to finding, a consensus, as I said previously about Börbel's. So kind of similar in that respect. He also made, similar to how Börbel's made a very clear distinction between dialogue and conversation, Bohm makes a distinction between dialogue and discussion. And he says that in a discussion, individuals have a fixed point of view and they go into discussion with the aim of defending this point of view. In a discussion, it can be that I have my point of view, you have yours, and I want you to listen to me and change your point of view, and you might want to, and you want me to listen to you and change my point of view. Börbel's believed dialogue is about, it's okay for each person to hold that point of view and continue to hold that point of view, but they should be able to talk, to kind of tease out each other's point of view, to listen, to explore those different ideas and each other's point of view. He called it thinking together as opposed to winning or trying to persuade the other. So it's not a competition, it's not argumentative, it's just how can we discuss this and understand each other's point of view. And you can see here from his quotes, he said a dialogue can be among any number of people, not just two. And it can make possible a flow of meaning within the group, out of which may emerge a new understanding. So you could have 10 people in a group. They may all have different points of view, but by everyone listening, talking, asking questions, but asking questions with a genuine interest and a genuine intention to understand and to explore each other, you may come to a point that everyone now has a new perspective and a new understanding on this topic. You may still have 10 different points of view, but you then all understand these 9 other points of view that are different to yours, which creates a new understanding, a new meaning within that group. And he believed that this shared meaning is the cement that holds people and societies together. So that's quite an interesting viewpoint. Okay, and this is Gadamer. So this is a video, and you can play that yourselves. But it's about the fusion of horizons. So The fusion of horizons is when two different perspectives, which are shaped by their unique horizons, come together and they merge. So this happens when two people having a dialogic encounter, a conversation, discussion, what they can all be kind of considered a dialogical encounter. But the important part being that they're trying to understand each other, they're making an attempt to understand each other. So similar to Bohm and Berbels, it's not that one perspective absorbs or overrides the other, but that these people interact with each other, and it creates a new horizon, more understanding, more meaningful, that encompasses both viewpoints, and it really leads to a deeper and more enriched understanding. I am going to pause now and let you watch that for a couple of minutes, and I will see you on the next slide. Now we're going to talk about Socratic dialogue, and this is probably the most famous form of dialogue that there is, philosophical dialogue. Socratic dialogues obviously comes from Socrates, and Socratic dialogues are the encouragement of more vigorous and critical thinking. It avoids stagnation of thought, and it challenges. It challenges preconceptions and prejudice, and it helps the people involved become better through increased understanding of their own points of view and different viewpoints. But on the downside, it can cause unease with your own knowledge and possibly puzzlement, because you might think you know something and then you go through a Socratic dialogue and realize you don't really know what you think you know. Which unfortunately was one of the problems that happened to Socrates, that he spent so much time using Socratic dialogue on the people around him in Athens that they eventually got sick of it and basically told him to stop. And he was told, you stop or we're going to put you to death. And he said, that is fine. Put me to death for the love of philosophy. There's a little bit more to it. But yeah, that's basically he said he would be happy with that. So that's an interesting fact about philosophy and Socrates. So in Socratic dialogue, one of the key techniques is the elenchus, which is a method of cross-examination or refutation. So Socrates, you can imagine him there in ancient Athens, walking up to one of the leaders of Athens at that time, and he would challenge them. And he would go up to them and say, what is such and such a thing? And the person who, is a very high-ranking lawyer or judge or something would think they know and feel comfortable in their answer, and they'd answer him. And he'd ask them more questions, and he would challenge their answers and find inconsistencies, and he would say things like, well, a minute ago you said this, but now you're saying this. Which is it? Obviously much fancier, but that's the kind of thing he would do. And he would find the inconsistencies and find the contradictions, and he would do that by keeping asking questions, which eventually would show them how that they are the problem and that they didn't understand what they thought they understand. He really used it to highlight gaps in their knowledge, and he really encouraged them to question what they thought they knew. His aim wasn't to humiliate, and the Socratic dialogue used nowadays isn't to humiliate, but it is meant to get people to think about what they know, and to have clarity in their thinking and more self-awareness. So our aim is, if in using Socratic questioning, is to make participants think a bit deeply and potentially come to a more refined or better understanding of a topic. So obviously this has developed quite a bit over the few thousand years since Socrates has died and was put to death. And in modern education, it's quite a popular technique to help people think critically, and is used in a lot of college courses in subjects like philosophy, law, literature, and history. It can really help students develop some logical reasoning. It can help them to learn how to construct and deconstruct arguments and really engage in a deep analysis of complex issues, because asking those questions really helps to shine a light on, do you understand in the way you think you understand? So some of the lines of questioning would be to clarify some concepts, probe their assumptions, examine the evidence that they know, explore the consequences of what they think they know, and then challenge the viewpoints. Could we look at it from a different point of view? So here is a video of the paper chase of Socratic questioning. So I am going to leave that for you to watch in your own time. Apologies. I was going to play it there, but it doesn't seem to want to. So yes, if you want to watch that, but that is a very, very good example of the Socratic method being used in a film. It's used in quite a few films. It's also used in Pulp Fiction and Legally Blunt. So if you've watched those films, you may see it. This is a discussion that obviously I'm not going to have by myself, but I think it is something that we might talk about in the next lecture, because it's a very interesting point about if it's still relevant, and if so, how. Okay, so expanding on the dialogue. So dialogue beyond words. So non-verbal communication isn't just a supplement or supportive element to spoken language, but it can actually function as a dialogue in its own right. So it can convey messages, emotions, and intentions that contribute to shared understanding. So non-verbal behaviors, listening as a response, responsive teaching, like making it relevant to your audience, and expressing yourself in different ways. So some of them are expressing and exchanging meaning. So that could be non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication can have a significant role in how people express emotions, their attitudes, or even their intentions. A really good way to think about this is we use a lot of texting these days, and people can misinterpret text because it's very plain. So it's up to the person, the reader, to interpret what those texts mean. You don't have the smiles, you don't have the body language, you don't really have the facial expressions. All these things here that are dialogue beyond words. When you are just reading a text, you don't have these things, so you're having to guess at them. And a lot of people have found that they have possibly got into arguments because they have been in a bad mood and they have interpreted a text message as being aggressive or confrontational when it wasn't intended to be, but because they themselves are feeling irritated, they took it to mean the same thing. So it's a very interesting point of view to really consider how non-verbal communication affects you. For example, a smile can really indicate whether someone's feeling friendly, which is why that a lot of people put like smiley emojis onto text, so you know how how that person is feeling or what they're suggesting. And when you're talking to someone, and we look at their face as we're talking to them, and you'd be talking to someone and they're just nodding, and you're like, okay, I'll carry on. They're interested. But if you're talking to someone who just has a blank face, are they interested? Do they want me to stop? Without that body language, it's very, very hard to know what the other person is conveying. Gestures like pointing or waving really help you understand what is going on, and again, is something that is missing from text-based conversation. So those non-verbal signs are really important for creating meaning, but they also help people to build connections with other people. And if you've ever been in a situation where all your communication with the person is through text, or when you don't get to see them, it's a lot harder to have a connection with them because you don't see their body language, you don't hear their tone of voice, you don't really know who they are or what they're like. And that connection is built a lot better when you add in those non-verbal cues as well. And in some cases, non-verbal cues can actually replace verbal communication entirely. And this can be something like body language. So body language can really reveal emotional states, and sometimes more than words. So you think about if you're talking to someone and they're interested and they lean forward you'd be like, that person's interested in what I'm saying. If they lean back and lean away from you, you would kind of think, maybe it's time to wind up this conversation about dialogue. And we all know that if someone crosses their arms, they may be uncomfortable with the conversation, they may be feeling a little bit defensive. If you're talking to someone and they turn and walk away, they're no longer interested in what you're saying. If you send them a text and it just gives you the 2 blue ticks on WhatsApp, as far as you know, they've opened it and they've read it and they just haven't replied to you. We don't know if they've opened it and just closed it and put the phone back down again. And that's another thing where not having those non-verbal communication signals, it can be quite problematic. So facial expressions are, of course, very, very common. And they're considered universal language because no matter what country, what language you speak, everyone uses facial expressions. Everyone uses things like frowning, smiling, raising eyebrows, scrunching up your face. They really function as dialogue themselves, regardless of what your words are actually saying. They can create their own dialogue between the people. Eye contact is considered a form of dialogue. This can be a little bit controversial because, of course, some people, especially neurodivergent people, struggle with eye contact. So for most people, or for a lot of people, eye contact is considered important and it can be very, very powerful. And a lot of direct eye contact can kind of say someone is confident, but too much eye contact is almost confrontational. So then when you have people who don't like eye contact, they're generally considered shy or awkward, or perhaps they don't want to speak to, and it can mean a lot of different things. So it's the importance of eye contact is something that perhaps neurotypical people really rely on, whereas in other populations, such as neurodivergent populations, it's not that important. It's not something they like, it's not something they enjoy. So again, when we're thinking about dialogue, or thinking about dialogue outside words, we also have to think about the person who is conveying it. Like, is there a reason that they don't want to do these things? So the next one is silence as communication. So silence is a form of communication, of course. And sometimes silence can be annoyance. There can be pauses. There can be, silence can be reflective. Silence can be just nice. You can be with someone and you can be silent because you're having a wonderful time and they're your favorite person. You're just sitting there quietly. But you can be silent with someone else and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable and you're making the point of, I don't want to talk to you. So silence, depending on the context, depending on the other things that are happening within the dialogue, can mean a lot of different things. So you can see that there is a lot of parts of dialogue, nonverbal communication. And then the final one I will touch on here is like the tone of voice, and the importance of tone of voice for nonverbal communication. So your tone of voice will tell, no matter what you're saying, your tone of voice will actually say what you genuinely mean. And I think we all know that we've all been in those situations where someone has been angry and their words might sound angry, but their voice sounds soft and gentle and it's confusing. Or their words can be lovely and the nicest things you've ever heard, but their tone of voice is really annoyed. And it can be confusing when the tone of voice and the context, the words, the dialogue itself don't line up. So it's important to, when we think about dialogue and when we're talking about dialogue in a professional context, to think about, how do I convey myself? What am I telling my audience?